My name is Hector, and as I share this chapter of my life, I can't help but wish that men didn't feel the need for women to complete their lives. By complete life, I mean the conventional idea of having a family and kids together. If that weren't considered a necessity, maybe I wouldn't have ended up in another relationship after the troubles my ex-wife Allison brought into my life. To maintain my anonymity, let's stick with Hector as my name. I'm a 33-year-old guy, and at the time of this story, Allison is 27. Ours wasn't the typical love story you hear about, where we were high school sweethearts or met in college. Fate had a peculiar way of bringing us together. I worked as a customer care representative, and Allison was just another disgruntled customer calling to complain about one of our products. Fate, or perhaps coincidence, had me specifically assigned to handle her issue. Little did I know that this seemingly ordinary call would change the course of my life. After resolving her complaint, we ended up having a spontaneous conversation and, surprisingly, became friends. As time passed, our connection deepened, and we eventually became lovers. Looking back, I sometimes wish I hadn't been the one to take her call that day. Maybe, just maybe, I could have prevented the cascade of events that followed. I believed meeting Allison was a divine intervention. At that moment, I was earnestly praying for God to guide me to a life partner, and Allison entered my life almost simultaneously. She worked as a marketer for a real estate company and seemed to be doing well for herself. Despite our differences in income, she earned more than I did. I never felt uneasy about it. I was content with my middle-class lifestyle, working hard to pay the bills and make ends meet. During our year plus of dating, there were no apparent signs that Allison could or would cheat on me. I, too, remained faithful, with no intentions of straying from the commitment we had built. It was a stark contrast to my experiences in high school, where infidelity had been a part of my past. The first time I felt the warmth of genuine love was when Allison entered my life. Her affection was unmistakable, and I felt like the luckiest man on earth to have her by my side. When I introduced her to my parents, they instantly adored her. Her calm, sweet, and loving nature won them over, and they were thrilled that I had found someone so wonderful. The feeling was mutual with Allison's parents. They too embraced me warmly, and everything seemed to fall into place. After ensuring that our relationship was on solid ground, I gathered the courage to pop the question. To my joy, she said yes. Our wedding was a beautiful celebration, attended by friends and colleagues from Allison's workplace. Among them was Scott, a colleague and marketing buddy. Although Allison had mentioned him before, meeting him for the first time at our wedding raised no suspicions. The early days of our marriage were blissful. Allison and I decided to move to a larger apartment as my bachelor pad was too small for both of us. She had her standards, and understandably so, and we embarked on this new chapter together. Allison was an amazing wife, taking care of the household chores and looking after me. While we shared responsibilities, she often preferred to take on the lion's share, and I had no complaints. The first few months were idyllic, and Allison suggested we wait for 2 years before starting a family. Although I had reservations, as we hadn't initially discussed waiting, I tried to broach the topic a few times. She remained adamant, asking me to give up on persuading her. Looking back, I'm glad I respected her wishes, as pressing on might have added more strain to our relationship. After getting married, I didn't follow the typical movie script of switching jobs. I continued with my existing job, and life seemed to be moving forward smoothly. As the days went by, I continued in my role as a customer care representative, and my pay remained unchanged. In contrast, Allison was experiencing a significant upward trajectory in her career. Within 9 months, she had been promoted twice, resulting in a substantial increase in her income. However, her newfound success came at a cost to our relationship. Allison's job demanded frequent travel, citing the urgency of selling properties and meeting client demands. This wasn't part of our original plan, and it became increasingly disheartening. There were times when she wouldn't spend even a week with me in a month, constantly canceling our plans and always having her schedule packed with flights. I tried discussing my feelings with her, expressing how her constant absence was affecting me, but it seemed like she was indifferent to my concerns. The situation worsened when I discovered that she was consistently traveling with Scott. They were practically inseparable, whether it was attending meetings at expensive restaurants or catching early morning flights for crucial appointments. The toll on my mental well-being became evident as insecurity started to consume me. I grappled with the idea that if Scott wasn't picking her up at our home for their business outings, he was calling her at the crack of dawn to remind her of their early meetings. The strain on our relationship intensified as even the rare moments we spent together, like having breakfast, were overshadowed by the impending likelihood of her having to rush off for work. This routine continued for a while, and I felt powerless to change it. Allison insisted that she had to make money, justifying her relentless work schedule. The breaking point came one evening when a group of policemen knocked on my door. They presented a warrant and requested my presence for interrogation. Allison had been away on a trip, and I was taken to the station without hesitation. During the questioning, I was left alone for an hour before a female police officer entered the room. Despite my repeated answers, she persistently questioned me about Allison and Scott. The previous night before her trip, we had been together, preparing for bed when Scott called. He informed her about an urgent business trip to a neighboring state to meet a mega client interested in purchasing $1 million property. That was the extent of my knowledge about Allison and Scott's activities. The interrogation continued, revealing the beginning of a tumultuous chapter that I never saw coming. The female officer relentlessly questioned me about Allison and Scott. Despite explaining the limited extent of my knowledge, the interrogation persisted. The confusion heightened when two additional officers joined, inquiring about any past issues with Scott or undisclosed incidents involving all of us. As thoughts raced through my mind, I considered whether Scott had reported me or if Allison had said something during one of our disagreements about her frequent travels. The officers remained tight-lipped about the reason for my interrogation, merely locking me in a room and bombarding me with numerous questions simultaneously. To add to the surreal nature of the situation, they scrutinized my phone, claiming to keep it temporarily. As the hours passed, the interrogation became more intense, focusing on Scott. Despite their relentless efforts, I had nothing to reveal, and my frustration grew. The officers, adopting a seemingly friendly tone, urged me to talk, promising assistance. However, their tactics shifted, insinuating guilt and stating that they knew I was hiding something. At this point, exhaustion set in, and I wished the whole ordeal was just a scene from a Hollywood movie. Unfortunately, it was my reality. We spent 3 more hours in the relentless back and forth about Scott, and as their tactics, they resorted to assertive statements, claiming they knew I was guilty and that I couldn't hide it any longer. The situation became increasingly confusing and complicated, leaving me desperate for some clarity. The situation took an even darker turn when the police, in their relentless pursuit, suggested that I admit to acting out of jealousy. Fatigue and frustration took over, and I demanded an explanation for the interrogation. After moments of hesitation, they finally revealed the truth. It was all about Scott. To my horror, I discovered that Scott hadn't traveled out of the state with Allison, as they initially claimed. The shock intensified when I learned that Allison was having an affair with Scott. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks, and my initial reaction was a mix of churning in my lower stomach and an overwhelming sense of heartbreak. All those years, she had portrayed Scott as nothing more than a co-worker with a shared passion for making money. Little did I know that their passion extended beyond their professional lives. I acknowledge that my initial response might come across as cold, but at that moment I was too preoccupied with my own shock and heartbreak to express empathy for Scott. The news of his attack and the subsequent revelation of their affair left me feeling betrayed. Allison, a skilled liar and actress, had successfully concealed their relationship. I never suspected that, despite their closeness, something more was happening between them. They skillfully masked their affair as solely work-related, centered around their shared pursuit of wealth. It was a deception that threw me off balance. As the police officers observed the genuine shock and disappointment on my face, it became evident that I had been completely unaware of Allison and Scott's relationship. The unraveling truth revealed that Scott wasn't just involved with Allison, he had multiple other relationships. I found myself unwittingly falling under the list of suspects. Allison and Scott had been in town all along, deceiving me about their frequent travels. It made me question the authenticity of their every excuse and the countless times I had foolishly believed them. Fortunately, I was eventually released from police custody when they realized I wasn't involved in the incident with Scott. Despite the hours of uncertainty and questioning, I was grateful to have learned the truth about my marriage. Once my phone was returned to me, I checked for any attempts by Allison to reach out, but there were none. It was then that I decided to contact her. I called her twice before she answered, and she explained that she was at the hospital with Scott due to an accident. The confirmation of what the police officers had told me brought me to tears. At that moment, I knew our marriage was over, perhaps long before, but I had been clinging to it, trying to make it work. The realization that Allison and Scott had shared intimate moments haunted me. The thought of her moaning his name, being naked in front of him, and doing things we used to do as a couple drove me to madness. That night, I spent hours packing her bags. The next morning, I called my workplace, informing them of a family emergency, and drove her belongings to her parents' house without saying a word. When Allison returned after a few days, she informed me that Scott hadn't survived due to severe burns. I couldn't feign ignorance, so I revealed everything I knew about her affair with Scott. Despite her tears and pleas, I was resolute. I had contacted a lawyer, and our divorce was in progress. She claimed it was a one-time mistake, but I couldn't trust that lie. My decision was firm, and I didn't want to endure the embarrassment of police involvement again. Months after our divorce, she attempted to come back, but I couldn't let her back into my life. I refused to be taken for a fool and have my love taken for granted. It's been a while since then, and I haven't been able to love or date another woman. The scars of betrayal and heartbreak linger, making it challenging for me to open up to the possibility of love again.